We're going to continue on with the evidence for evolution, and our next piece of evidence is the fossil record. So fossils will show the past organisms that have been on Earth and how they have differed from the organisms that are alive today. So you can see on this picture on the right, we've got some echinoderms, which are the relatives of the sea urchins that are alive today. And then we can see some fossilized plant material over here on the right that look like ferns that are relatives of the ferns today. And then we've got a triceratops here in the middle, which obviously they are extinct because a lot of these species in the fossil record are no longer living today. And we can see how species have evolved or changed over time from what they were in the fossil record to the ones that are alive today. So let's take a look at the evolution of new groups of organisms through the fossil record. And we can take a look at the evolution of the cetaceans. And cetaceans will include animals like whales, dolphins, and porpoises. So in the fossil record, they found a species called Pakicetus. And this was a land animal that was related to the even-toed hoofed animals or ungulates. And the reason they knew that it was an even-toed hoofed animal was that they looked at its ankle bone and noticed that on the bottom of its ankle bone there were two prominences here. And you can see that on the even-toed hoofed animals that are alive today, like pigs and deer. And then if you compare that to the ankle bone of like a dog, which doesn't have a hoof, you can see that that's a very different shape. So here's the evolutionary tree that they've put together for cetaceans from the fossil record and then also from looking at DNA. And here's the living cetaceans that are alive today. And the closest living relative to the whales, dolphins, and porpoises are actually hippos, which is pretty interesting. And so here's that fossil Pakicetus that was a hoofed land animal, and that lived a little over 50 million years ago. And they found it in Pakistan, so that's how it got its name. And then the next fossil they found, Rhodocetus, was living mostly in shallow oceans and would come up on land, so it was probably like a sea lion. And then the next fossil they found, Doradon, lived its whole life in the ocean. And so this one was more whale-like or dolphin-like. And then we finally get to our living whales and dolphins and porpoises that we have today. And what's interesting, if you look at the fossilized skeletons and then the skeletons of the cetaceans we have today, you can see that gradually the hind limbs eventually got lost because the whales don't need a hind limb as they're swimming around in the ocean. So they've developed a tail with a fluke on there to help propel them through the water. So the whales today and dolphins and porpoises just have a pelvis, and they've lost all the other remaining bones of the rear limb. Okay, and then we also have fossil record of the evolution of horses. Horses actually evolved in North America, and horses evolved about 55 million years ago in forests, and they were actually pretty small. They were about the size of a Cocker Spaniel. And they did have 4 toes. They didn't have a hoof yet. And they were browsers. They would eat the bushes and things, the undergrowth in the forest. And they needed the 4 toes because they needed to run away and escape from predators, and they needed the 4 toes to grip as they kind of darted around the bushes. But then the environment started to change and things dried out and the forests gave way to grasslands. And so it was better to be larger, and you can see that they ended up losing their toes, and eventually they just ended up with one toe with a hoof, and that allowed them to run faster. And they also changed their teeth because now they were eating a lot of grass instead of the leaves from the bushes. And so their teeth changed to be more of a grinding surface to deal with all the grass that they were eating. So you can see the fossil record documents the evolution of the horses. Okay, and then this one's an interesting fossil. This is Archaeopteryx. So this is a fossil found in Germany, and it just shows the transition from dinosaurs to birds. And you can actually see the imprint of the feathers. Here's a wing here, and here's another wing here from the forelimbs, and then here's the head, and then the rear limbs would be back here. Archaeopteryx was about the size of a raven. They don't think it was a great flyer, but probably could glide. And it had a lot of characteristics of the dinosaurs, but also had some bird-like characteristics as well. So it was kind of showing that transition as the birds were developing and evolving from the dinosaurs. And then our last evidence of evolution we're going to talk about is biogeography. And this is just the study of the past and present geographic distribution of species. And we see that the continental drift, or just the movement of the tectonic plates, will affect the geographic distribution of the species. And then if we take a look at islands, a lot of islands have endemic species, or just species that are only found on those islands, and those endemic species will most closely be related to species found on the mainland closest to the island. So here's just showing continental drift. We have had a number of supercontinents that have formed throughout Earth's history, and this is just the latest one, Pangaea, and there were other supercontinents before that. And then Pangaea broke apart, and then here's the continents where they are today. And when Pangaea was around and all these continents were all connected together, that affected where these different species of dinosaurs lived, and we found their fossils. So this one, Cyanonathus, was a meat-eating dinosaur, and we found fossils of this species in South America and Africa. And this gave evidence that South America and Africa were attached back then, because this species of dinosaur does not look like it could swim across the ocean to where these continents are located today. So we knew that, during the time this dinosaur lived, these two continents were actually joined together. Okay, and then if we look at the biogeography of marsupials, marsupials we think evolved in North America, and they evolved at a time when Pangaea was formed, and so all these continents were all joined together. And then the marsupials moved down into South America, and then they also, before Australia broke off, they also went over to Australia. And that's how we ended up with all of those marsupials on Australia. We still do have marsupials in South America, and we do have one species of marsupial in North America still, and that's the opossum.